Hello, Dana Abbott here, and welcome to another Signature Series tutorial by Century Martial Arts. This tutorial will offer you tips on what is the best sword for you. Let us look at the three swords that we have here that is manufactured by Century Martial Arts. We have 3 Shinken and 1 Iaito. Today, I'm just going to work on the Shinken, what you also know as live blades or real steel sharp samurai swords. We have 3 different sizes. We have the classical katana that usually is seen in all the Japanese movies because this is the original design that goes back hundreds of years. We have another katana. It is the XL blade, which offers a wider, stronger blade for better cutting, but it isn't a classical blade, so this one offers you good cutting abilities and is a much heavier model. Then we have the wakizashi, or the shorter samurai sword that you affix to your side. One of these 3 will fit your hand very, very well. To make an informed decision, let's look at the classical blade first. This classical blade design goes back hundreds of years. When you first get your sword or you want to inspect your sword for the first time, standing up or in a kneeling position, hold the sword tight to you here and then lift the saya off of the sword. And then when you bring the sword back in, bring the saya back onto the sword. You don't really need to move the blade around as much. And speaking about blades, a lot of us think, how sharp is our sword? How sharp can it be? These are very sharp and will cut your finger very, very fast. So you must take extreme caution on making sure your appendages don't get in the way. If I'm going to look to see how sharp this sword is, let me bring a piece of paper here, and you can see that it cuts it fairly easily. So when you start cutting tatami mats and different objects, it's guaranteed that you'll be able to cut them. Although when you deal with a classic blade, it's a little smaller and lighter. If you look at a sword blade or the weight of a sword blade the same way you would look at a caliber of a firearm, just imagine that this would be a smaller caliber firearm compared to the XL blade, which would be a larger round. Same thing with swording. If you want to cut through a heavier object, you must use a heavier sword. But as a general rule, this classical blade is the best all-around blade to use in test cutting, kata, and of course, technique training. Now let me put my blade down here without resheathing it. And let's go to the XL blade, the heavier cutting blade. And of course, I bring it out this way, drop the saya down, and you can see this one is a little bit more meatier. This one will cut through most everything, much easier than this one. But then again, you don't learn the technique well enough. There is a term the Japanese use, it's called shiboru or shibori. It is called ringing the handle. In test cutting with a heavier blade, ringing isn't needed as much, but using a finer sword on the classical series, you'll find out that your ringing technique has to be much stronger. If I bring up both swords and compare them, you can see the blade differences are pretty different, aren't they? Well, there are the good points or bad points or advantages and disadvantages of having one blade or the other. One is if you do extensive cutting of tatami mats, bamboo, and other objects, this blade will work best. It comes in straight, the blade is nicely balanced, the handle fits in well. When you lift it up and you do all your cutting, for example, you'll find out that when it does hit the target, it's going to go right through it really fast. And the reason why is this one is a lot sharper than the classical blade. And that's because it's the geometry of the blade and the angle of the blade itself. For example, if I find a another piece of paper, you can see that this cuts well, if not better. I'd like you to also understand that the disadvantage is trying to sheath it in a kata. A lot of times, this blade offers you fear when you try to bring it back through your fingers. For example, if I bring the sheath down onto this and I turn over here on my side and I bring the sheath in and I pull the sword out like this, I almost have to lean forward, and this big meaty blade, I really have to figure how it's not going to be cutting my hands because it's taken up the whole palm here. So when I start drawing and sheathing this sword here, it just isn't as fun as dealing with a classical original blade. And the reason why is, watch the difference. Now, with this classical blade, I put this into my belt, and you'll see that, oh, this one's easy to pull. This one's easy to sheath. This one's easier to move. So you'll find out that when you're working with blades, sometimes a smaller blade is much not safer, but the fear of the sword will be lessened. So if you start off with a classical blade and you become familiar with it, over a short amount of time, you can go over to the XL blade with ease. So you figure, well, which one should I get? Should I get the classical blade or the XL blade? Well, it's up to you and what you want to do. Do you want to do test cutting every day? Or will you put your blade up over the fireplace and look at it? There are many ways you manipulate a blade, and everybody has a different thought. Personally, if I was going to go out there and only have one blade, I'd use the classical blade because I do a lot of kata, I do a lot of sword drawing, I do hapogiri and all those aspects. But if I was in a zombie apocalypse, yeah, I'd be going with the XL blade just because it's a much larger blade. Now, if we looked at the classic blade and the XL blade, well, let's look at the wakizashi. If you pull this wakizashi out, you can see, wow, this is a fairly thin blade. It's really, really thin. And is it sharp? Yeah, it's pretty sharp. Let's see what we have here. And it cuts fairly well, doesn't it? So I want you to see that all these swords are sharp, and again, be careful. When you sheath this one, same way. You keep your elbows in so no one will get cut. You pull the sword out, and let's look at it. This is a nice wakizashi. Now, there are also different widths and different lengths of wakizashi blades. This one is a little bit more on the thinner side, which is very good to begin drawing and sheathing and cutting. This sword in particular, if you looked at it like a firearm, is a small little pistol compared to a rifle. So I want you to look at, you can't cut big, heavy objects with this. So later, if you look at our tutorial on tatami mats and how to roll a tatami mat, you'll see that there's full-size tatami mats and half-size tatami mats. This sword will work pretty good on a full-size tatami mat if you have the technique down. Otherwise, you'll be frustrated trying to cut this way or other. The best bet is to use a half mat and begin that way so you get full cuts either down left and down right, and then you start the different patterns that are in the Rokudangiri or the downward diagonal or upward diagonal cuts. Another thing that the wakizashi is fun for is, a lot of times people think, well, I can't really use a sword. You can't take it outside, you can't take it down to the park. And I want to use more of a tactical blade. Well, the wakizashi was the samurai's tactical blade. So if you start thinking, I don't need anything big, but I want a nice tactical blade that I can manipulate and also work into an artistic venue with drawing and sheathing, because you can see that this blade comes in and out fairly fast. And as a tactical blade, you'll find out that you can do lots of different cutting and you can manipulate the blade a lot easier. So this one might be more versatile for you, basically because you can use your right hand or your left hand. Sometimes if you bring it in, you can use both hands. But the nicest thing about the wakizashi is it isn't heavy, it fits everywhere, and you can study swordsmanship very well from this sword. So when you call Century Martial Arts or contact them online and decide what sword will work best for me out of these three, this tutorial will give you just a little bit more advice on what will be best for you. The classical series, which is about 1,000 grams, or the XL series, which is about 1,350 grams. Or the short wakizashi, which is about 650 to 700 grams, which is called also your tactical blade. With that thought, look at the tutorials that we have concerning the Signature series and watch this a couple of times to determine what is the best blade for you and what will fit your hand like a glove.